Chair Justin.
Happy Vibrant Monday, everybody. On today, the 21st of August. The connection activity I have for everybody today is with most of us going back to school. I know some of us don't go back to school or haven't had a school thing, but with most of us going back to school, what is the best back to school moment of the week? If you'll just drop it in the chat. And we will start with that.
I found parking at UK today.
Congrats, my daughter hasn't.
She's still driving around looking for space.
She's still driving around.
Wow, those are great. Does anyone want to come off mute and share theirs?
I realized that I was so envious. There's just something about college move-in days. All those people on Facebook, I'm like, oh, I just miss that. There's just something about it.
Agreed. It's been really exciting at UK these last couple of weeks with kids moving in, and it's just an amazing time of year. But it's just so energetic and great to have all these young people and all of that. It's been awesome.
Yeah, it's
my daughter hasn't yet.
Go ahead, Penny.
No, she just hadn't gone. She hadn't left yet, so we're good. I haven't had that experience.
Yeah, this is my daughter's second year at UK. She absolutely loves it. So I've been getting pictures throughout the day, which I love. My son is at Northern Kentucky University, and haven't heard anything yet from him. Surprise.
Oh. That's awesome. I love one of the great gifts of education is to get to start fresh in August every year with renewed energy, clarity, hopefully some rest for the summer. It is such a gift of this whole kind of business that we're in here in education. Rob Smith giving a shout out to Norse there. All right.
That's NKU.
Okay. Well, thanks so much for sharing, everyone. Those are great. It's great to celebrate new starts.
Oh yeah, celebrating back to school.
That's right.
All right.
Well,
Next
up.
is
Yep, go ahead.
attendance. Yay. In true back to school fashion, I feel like the substitute with the paper, and here we go. So Nisha, Ajana, are you on the call? If you can unmute and just say here, or if they pop it in the chat, Karen, yell at me. I can't see the chat, but
Will do.
all right. Rachel Albright,
I'm here.
Danette Baker,
I am here.
Raider Barnes, Penny Christian,
Present.
Susan Sintra, Robin Cochran, Carmen Coleman,
I'm here.
Alfonso de Torres Nunez, Anne DeMott,
I'm here.
Susan Dougal,
Here.
Rima Dutt,
Here.
Holly Elmore, Travis Hamby, Amy Harris, Mike Hesketh, Rhea Eisenberg,
Here.
I'm going to try this one. This is where I really feel like the substitute. Soliana Mesfin, Julie Monarch, Jordan Pack, Lynn Petrie, Karen Sheeting, Rashawn West, and Carrie Wilkerson.
Here.
All right. Well, it's nice to see all of you on the call, and thanks for joining. And
Justin, quick word on a couple of those folks who are missing. I got a few emails from folks who indicated they were going to be late. And so we'll just keep an eye out for folks who come in. I'll try to let you know.
I'll keep it open.
Perfect.
All right, and Susan, I think, is with us or going to join us. She's in transit as well. And so we just want to give this space to Rhea briefly. Rhea works very hard behind the scenes during every meeting to capture our meeting notes. So just want to shout out and thank her for taking on that additional volunteer spot on our committee. And just want to open it up to you, Rhea, to just quickly recap the minutes and just the items that were accomplished during our last meeting when we were together, just to bring it back to folks.
Sure. Thanks for those kind words, Miss Sarah, and be glad to do that. So on our last meeting, July 31st, and I apologize for my informal approach to reviewing our meeting notes. Justin asked us one thing we were excited about for this year, and our committee members shared those thoughts. Then Miss Snipes took attendance and went over our meeting notes from the last meeting, and then asked our members to approve those minutes. Then Susan Strange from the UWL, United We Learn Council, gave a brief orientation of the Slack app platform to help all the committees and the committee members communicate with one another. And that's like 80 plus people. And then we had Rob Smith, statewide deeper learning representative, come to share what his team has been working on with deeper learning and the grant that he's working on with the 8 regional hubs or co-ops. And he shared his website, the www.kaec8.org. And then Rachel Albright also shared that deeper learning teams can point individuals in the right direction to see some of the work. Then Rob Smith again shared the KAEC Pillars of Deeper Learning briefly from that website that I cited a moment ago. And then Ms. Susan Strange also shared other committee members' work from the Acceleration for Innovation and Bold New Futures summaries of work. Susan Dougal shared more about access for deeper learning for all in response to the De Torres Nunez concerns. Oh, let me rephrase that. I apologize. So Susan Dougal shared more about access for deeper learning because Mr. De Torres Nunez had concerns for multilingual learners, and so she was addressing his concern. And then Karen Perry said that learning design decisions will be able to be more focused at the local level, and that we should be excited to see that shift being supported. Then she talked a little bit about the CGSA grant for Promise Deliverables of Professional Development and Competency Systems. Then we had our breakout groups, and then they shared our future meeting dates, and I believe all of us had those dates shared with us via email, and also confirmed and were able to confirm our attendance for those future meetings. And that is all I have.
Thank you so much, Rhea, for the notes and the recap, and for jumping in there to contribute and sharing. I just want to place a note prior to Karen sharing some survey results that came out of our committee. as we are working as facilitators to really help support the planning and obviously facilitation of these meetings, we really want to create a space where you all feel safe to both suggest agenda items, but also lead those agenda items. And so it's something that Karen and I are continuously working to get better at. And we hope that you'll see some changes that we've made already based on some of your survey results tonight. But later in the meeting, when we have a chance to propose some future agenda items, please don't hesitate to offer up your expertise and skills, because we certainly know we're not the only ones in the room who are leaders and facilitators in our professional and personal lives too. So just want to put a plug in there for that. Rhea, thank you for jumping in, as we certainly want to shift more and more to just opening the floor up to our committee members to lead these meetings. And Karen, I will abruptly pass it over to you just to share with folks our next agenda item, just recapping some of the survey results and input from our team.
Oh, thank you, Sarah. I will, we're going to go a little bit out of order here on the agenda. I will.
Sorry about that.
No, that's okay. I'm happy to share those survey results, and then we're actually going to pass over to Andre Rupp here in just a second. Andre, do you mind if we do the survey results really quickly?
I was just so tired. It was one of those things.
Do what you need to do.
You're asleep too.
Okay, Jordan, I'm gonna mute your mic there. Okay, actually, Andre, let me just we'll do that really quickly, and then we'll be right over to you.
Yeah, no stress.
So, actually going to, if you recall, a few weeks ago, you received an email from Susan Strange asking about your recommitment to serving on Kentucky United We Learn in the standing committee. So I'd love to, those results were received. The leadership team looked at the results and really took the feedback really seriously. And so one of the things that we'd like to do is to share with you what some of those results were specifically from our standing committee. I'm going to share screen here for just a second and walk you through really just a very high level of what the feedback was from folks in our particular committee. Hopefully you can see the screen there. If you recall, the first set of questions really asked about you and which committee you were in, and so these are the results just from Vibrant Learning only. The first set of questions were really around the direction, vision, and goals of Kentucky United We Learn. You'll see here in these first two columns, these are our columns, and then in the right-hand columns are the council generally, so that would include the other two standing committees and anyone else who is a member. This, I should say, is out of a 4-point scale. And so the degree of agreement, these are people who indicated they either agreed or strongly agreed with the statement that the mandated direction for the council is clear, and et cetera on down there. Let me see if I can zoom in a little bit. Oops.
That's great, Karen.
Is it?
Yep.
Okay. Okay, perfect. All right. So next, and you can see the comments there down below. The comments, I just want you to know, we're taken very seriously by leadership, all of the comments for the Kentucky United We Learn standing committees. And so we recognize that some of these comments are directly about our standing committee and some of these are about the council overall, but these comments were taken very seriously. And so obviously you can just take a second to read there. But overall, high degree of agreement here on these statements about direction, vision, and goals of the work. The next set of questions was about communication. So these were questions about the frequency and scheduling of meetings, which we really reflected a lot about, people's feedback on the frequency and scheduling of meetings, sufficient information, as Sarah just pointed out, have the ability to add agenda items, et cetera. And then you can see the comments down below there as well. One of the reasons why we moved our own meetings back a little bit was to accommodate folks in the central time zone, so that we could have folks here. We were laughing at the beginning of the call. Central time zone folks were first here, first in the meeting, which I think is a good sign. So you can see pretty high level agreement here. The last set of questions was about meeting climate and efficiency, quality of presentations, council members enjoy a positive work environment, a relationship, professional respect, etc. High levels of agreement here, and you can see the averages and the comments. And then we have some successes here. Collaboration, reciprocity, working with VLA is great. You can see this. Just give you a second to read those. And then some areas of improvement for us. We will take these survey results and put them in our shared drive so that they're accessible to members. And so we'll move those over here right after this meeting tonight. I think a thing that I would want to relay and open to Sarah, who wants to add, or anyone else here from Kentucky United We Learn leadership. These survey results are taken very seriously. And so just know that as people are expressing both things they're excited about, but also things they're concerned about, we have looked at these. We will continue to reflect on these to see what we can do to come closer to meeting our aspirations for this set of working groups and the Kentucky United We Learn working groups. And so just know that you know, your opinion matters, and when we ask, we really mean that we're paying attention. So appreciate you doing those and giving your honest feedback. Anyone else from Kentucky United We Learn want to share anything additional about the survey results?
Yeah, I can. Just to let everybody know that the agenda for the November convening has very much taken all of these comments, all of the suggestions and areas for improvement into consideration. We've been spending a lot of time really changing up the agenda this time around. And I know we got Karen and Paul and Andre on here, Penny, all who can attest to how much work we're putting into making sure that this agenda is really meaningful for all of you. One of the things we heard a lot of folks saying that we need a common goal for the Cool Council overall. And so that is a major focus for our November convening. We will get that moonshot figured out, and then you all will have some time to really work on what is your part of that moonshot, and we'll have some cross-functional or cross-committee team time as well. So I think that you all will really see that that we really did listen, and that this is going to be a really productive convening. That's my hope. Thanks, Karen.
Yeah, thank you, Karen. So many Karens. So thanks for sharing that from the council-wide perspective. Yeah, thank you for being here. Okay, so we're gonna put those in the results in our shared folder, so you have them if you want to go back and dig into those comments at all, and any of the other quantitative data that's in there as well. And now I'm going to turn it back to Sarah, who's going to introduce our next guest, who is here from Accelerating Innovation.
Thank you, Karen. Yeah, we're joined by the amazing Andre Rupp, who joins us a few roles from the Center for Assessment and helps facilitate, serves in a similar capacity as Karen and myself, but for the Accelerating Innovation Committee. So in response to some of that earliest feedback from the Cool Council convenings, we know and feel very strongly as well that we need to do everything in our power to ensure that cross committee collaboration is a priority across all three standing committees. We know that that is the secret sauce to getting the most work done and accomplished through the council as a whole. And so we're really excited to be more intentional with members of the Accelerating Innovation and Bold New Futures Committee joining us in these sessions, and we do the same for them in return. So if you're ever interested in joining one of our other committees and doing our share outs, don't hesitate to reach out as well if you'd like to learn from them. So Andre's joining us tonight. We are excited to give him about 10 minutes, Andre, if you will, to just update us on the work of AI. We're really excited. Later in our session, we'll be diving into a task where we explore some existing databases that you've been exposed to in meetings past to really tackle a task that AI has done as well, to really start to see where our thoughts are in building out a bank of vibrant learning and the associated assessment elements that go along with that. And so we're excited about the opportunity to collaborate with Andre's group over in AI, and just thanks for being here with us, Andre, and sharing a little bit of an update from AI.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's always nice to be in another committee, so it's nice to be here. Hello, everybody. So you really hit on the two major lines of work, I would say, that we are currently engaged in within our committee, and I'm going to talk a little bit about each. So one is this idea of thinking through the way we are talking about it is essentially the configurability of the statewide system of systems. So which components under different constraints can be locally configured, which ones can be maybe locally configured under some state guidance, and which one have to be state or can be state controlled. And playing with that and sort of showcasing what that means for the overall system of systems as we like to do that. What I want to call out in this is that, we talked internally about how important it is to make some choices about like the representations that you pick. And I'll give you an example of that. And I would love to hear from your committee what kind of representations would be most natural for you. So if the language is like, we need to think through some prototypes of these system designs, some examples essentially of what this means. We have, for example, tried the following. So we had an activity where our members went through different examples from different states and also from within Kentucky, and they sort of talked about what is system that is more centrally versus more locally versus with a mixed sense of control for both the kind of evidence and the kind of evaluation of evidence would look like. So I had like, a table came out of that, for example, and people started sort of putting their thoughts in there. Then recently, we also took that and we created an alternative use case where, in fact, we sort of illustrated how important it is sometimes to pick a perspective. So we said sort of like, if you want to walk this through for a situation where a district, let's say, wants to, or the state wants to foreground literacy efforts, right, throughout the K-12 experience, what would that mean in terms of the different milestone experiences, the kind of vibrant learning experiences, assessment and accountability experiences, and so on and so forth. So then, we had a narrative description of that, a few pages that sort of synthesized some of these ideas from the table and put them into sort of a coherent frame. And you could use other frames for that. So you could use a frame where you say we want to foreground the operationalization of the portrait of a learner through didactic learning experiences and through defenses and exhibitions of learning and other kind of milestone markers. And then the third model that we've just started playing with is sort of to say like, okay, so if we take the current accountability system with its indicator set, what are some opportunities for expanding that into the early elementary and middle school so that you signal sort of the importance and relevance of the development of these more complex competencies and skill profiles in the portrait of a graduate. So what might it mean to have expanded indicators there? We haven't really taken that last one and put it in front of our committees. That was something that we at the leadership level had just started to map out. We want to share that with our committee members. But the point is, if in the November meeting, we want to go together across committees and sort of either in that meeting talk through or work through different prototypes, or have someone present a particular model or walkthrough of different prototypes, it would be really helpful, I think, if we could all talk a little bit about, what would be valuable to us. What is a prototype? What is a use case? What helps people understand what some of the broader system-wide choices can be? And I do think that also comes up for us a lot. I'm sure you have the same kind of tension sometimes, that there is the local, obviously, district and school level perspective, but we are also from the CGSA perspective and also from our mandate to support the department, also charged with, what does it mean at the state level? So what can we do? What kind of mechanisms can we put into place? And what kind of policies can we help support, create, that give sort of the desired degrees of freedom locally, but still also allow the state to enact its responsibilities. So this idea of what do we foreground at any particular moment, that's something that comes up. The complement to this is the systems bank development. So Sarah, you talked about this idea that you'll have an activity later that I think is sort of maybe modeled a bit on that. So, we want to engage our members with, again, this sort of state level kind of thinking of how do we organize information? We've had people who do this, in different ways. They've done individual case studies and looked at the literature. We've done interviews, and we've mocked up different kinds of, let's call it profiles, similar to the ones that are maybe sitting in Canopy or other kinds of databases. And one of the challenges is, so how do we get our committee members to sort of engage with that task, right? In sort of in a way that is accessible to them, that they feel like it's interesting enough for them. And so we've created this activity where we said, okay, so, look, if you can think of a few practical uses for a bank, if that was a real artifact, whether we do this or not, but if you could put yourself based on your own experience, in a role and responsibilities of certain stakeholders, whether that's a teacher, a school leader, a state leader, and you said they have to solve a particular kind of task, what kind of a bank might be, what kind of a collection of information would actually be useful to this person that currently doesn't exist? And then if you can describe that, what kind of functionalities does that maybe mean for this kind of interface that you're looking at? What does that mean in terms of maintaining it? What does it mean in terms of evaluating over time and thinking about the effectiveness of that? And so the idea was to just get people thinking a little bit and put concrete ideas on table before engaging more deeply in any kind of additional mock-up of that. Because I think from a State Department, that's sort of our challenge, right? This idea of, do we dock our information onto an existing mature database that exists? Do we build out database architectures that exist already within the KDE ecosystem, and there's a few that exist? Or is that not at all even the right path to go down into? We don't really need a database at all, although I think people could see some value of that. But the answer could be we need something else, or other things coupled with that. So we're trying to get our members engaged in that thinking. We have them fill out, hopefully we'll cook up these use cases, and we're going to look at what they're producing, and then synthesizing that in our next meeting, talk about that, what that means for the next steps in designing. And we're waiting also to bring some people from the KDE design team into that process. The moment isn't quite right yet, it's too early, but we would love to. And by the way, we recognize that this is something that should be driven at the end of the day, not by the assessment and accountability people. It should be driven by the vibrant learning experiences team, right? So ideally, you all were to say, look, we really believe that this would be a really practically meaningful, valuable interface, platform, way of collecting information. We are maybe not so quite sure what we might want to put in there from an assessment and accountability perspective, but maybe you guys over there can help us think through that, both in terms of things like what goes in there, but also, like I said earlier, how is that maintained? What do we mean by technical quality? Do we need to worry about this or not? And so ideally, though, that it's driven by you all, and we support that, because at the end of the day, assessment and accountability are in the service predominantly of supporting learning, even though we all know that there's some responsibilities that exist at the federal level. So finally, one other thing, I'm trying to think what I want to bring up. I will say this very quickly. We have thought about technical issues, but we are still, I think, figuring out what kind of conversations, analyses, and representation of technical quality are sort of like acceptable and digestible. So for example, we know that a lot of people are doing defenses of learning and exhibitions of learning. From our experience, people of course want to be systematic about that, and they use certain published frameworks and best practices from whether it's PBL works or maybe something that is adopted from deeper learning. So but we know that the board has, some board members at least, have some clear interest in sort of understanding sort of like what works, what doesn't, what evidence do we have, qualitative, quantitative, mixed method. So we are still trying to, we have some documents that lay out a bunch of guiding questions and considerations from the literature and experience, but we're still trying to figure out like how to embed that best in ways that people can actually hear it and can actually act upon it. So if you have any suggestions for example, how to work better with the co-ops or these bigger innovation initiatives, we are all ears, because that's certainly the way we feel like we can, hopefully provide an added value. And we're very open to listening to you saying, if you'd framed it like this, if you engage it like this, I think that would work. And finally, last quick thing, our committee technically has a mandate for scalability, supporting scalability. I will say that I think that still most naturally lies with you guys because you're doing most of the on the ground work. So scalability as, through the kind of like information collection work and maybe supporting evaluation work, I could see some of our committee helping with that to some degree. But we certainly, I feel like we are not really doing much on like directly through initiatives supporting scalability in any practical way. It seems to me that's something more that you all are doing. So if you ever have a moment where you say like, there's these aspects of this, of thinking about scalability, of like lifting up best practices in a way that exceeds our capacity, or maybe it's not our mandate, yeah, please let us know. And just see whether we can put this on the table, both in our leadership meeting, we have one every Friday morning, or in our group meeting. All right, that was, I think, 10 minutes or so. I hope that was helpful. Or is there something that anybody wants to ask me? Mention a reaction? Yeah, please.
Thank you, Andre. Thanks for sharing that. This is Susan Dougal, and one of the things I think Sarah put in the chat as you were talking, that how this would complement what we're thinking about as a database for vibrant learning. And I think one of the things that's always difficult, because they're so tightly related, it's hard to say which comes first, the vibrant learning experience or the assessment, and that backwards planning piece, that they go together. One of the things that I was thinking about, a lot of the work that KDE, Sarah and her team have done, and then and work that UK Next Gen has followed up on across districts, and Rob and Carmen and Rachel and their teams and the co-ops, what we're seeing happening right now, I think that might be important to inform your committee, is that because of the agreed upon performance outcomes and indicators that KDE has just published in their guidance document, we have those indicators at end of 2, 5, 8, and 12. Now we have a standard to scale. And so what UK Next Gen has been doing with districts and is now planning with at least 4 of our deeper learning teams in the co-ops is how to use that guidance document to create performance outcomes and indicators for the local performance, but portraits of a learner, so that there is a model for it, which is why that was developed. But people are able to take that now in their districts and use it to compose their own performance indicators and outcomes as they build their local assessment system. So I think it's really important, like you mentioned, that our co-ops are involved in these groups, our deeper learning teams, because I think we're starting to see it now from West Kentucky all the way over to South Central and KEDC all the way across. It's starting to scale. So I think that is something important for the committee to know too. I'm not sure who's on your committee who might be aware of that. But I think that's an important thing for them to kind of watch and be on top of.
So yeah, so let me, if you don't mind, let me ask you this quickly. So how can we watch that best and be on top of that? Because I think that is typically the challenge. It's very, there's a lot of moving parts and a lot of moving pieces to this. So when you said that, I was in my head, I was thinking, oh, that sounds fantastic. That's great. That's exactly right. That's what we want. And there's local adoption and adaptation and all of that. And it made me think, well, I could think of a few ways in which our committee, meaning also our committee members, could maybe help co-design or review something, review like proposals or locally developed sets of exemplars if there was a desire for this, or do we think about this more systemically as a programmatic statewide question? But I think I'm saying this, Susan, for example, Susan, do you have any suggestions for, number one, I think what a concrete problem is that people really want to have solved through the engagement of another committee, right? Because that is, I think, something, I don't know how it is about you, but we look for this all the time, right? Yes, there's a lot of things we could be doing, but if they don't solve a current pressing problem around, for example, assessment and accountability, redesign, or technical quality, or what have you, then, it's hard to prioritize. So, for example, in the scaling effort, Susan, do you have any recommendations of like pressing problems, ways to engage? I'd love to hear that.
I would make a suggestion, and then I would ask the others who are engaged in similar work to chime in. For your committee specifically, I think districts would appreciate solving the problem or addressing the problem of how is the work that we're doing now, building the local assessment system around performance assessment, using these indicators and outcomes, how can that be a part of our accountability system? So
yeah,
that's their why. Well, there's 2 whys. When we're working with districts and communities and developing the portraits and the outcomes, it's for 2 reasons. Primarily, it's what's best for kids. And that's local accountability to their communities. But secondly, hopefully, it's also going to fulfill some of the reciprocal accountability with state and federal, if we can get that approved. So I think that on my part, I feel like that would be the biggest question to answer around assessment. Anybody else?
I just thought, just as a teacher, thinking I'm a teacher and a librarian and a former teacher of a grade level that was held accountable to, state testing and those results. So, I speak on, performance indicators and things, when you talk about that, but, and recently I helped, I guess, to look at some of the test questions and sort of, look those over to make sure that those were all, I guess, without a bias, and that they were good, good questions for students, and help to set that bar. But I think if I think of it from that teacher perspective, are we also looking at this as far as rubrics and things of that nature that can be universally applied, that are sort of easily fit into many different scenarios? And pardon this, but I just kind of go back to national board, rubrics, and as a teacher and those assessments. I mean, you can take, their standards, and you can take their indicators for accomplished teaching, and that translates into lots of settings and lots of scenarios. And so in my mind, when I think of something that's going to work locally, statewide, and apply federally, I'm thinking of some kind of, I think in terms of one piece being a rubric that sort of can be universally applied in lots of different situations, that just spells out, vibrant learning, deeper learning, what's best for kids. And so that can be tailor-made in a way for children, for a community, that would show that a child is thinking beyond answering a question, that's on, the knowledge level, that they are having to think beyond that and show learning beyond that. And so when I think of something, I think in terms of a rubric, and I know that that's not all that we need, but that would be a good start in my thinking process.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Rhea. And it makes me think of a few related very quickly. So, so we have at a high level, if you wanted to think about this, if you're sort of like a designer or curriculum designer, or like you're in the local data teams, or even like a school leadership teams, like there's some higher level documents that we have with a variety of like considerations and quality guiding questions for reflecting essentially on your best practices that we could share, for example. But I know people want examples too. And I think the challenge with things like, or that I would like to know how to navigate on behalf of my committee, right, is this notion of, let's say, rubrics, exemplar databases, sort of evidence of what works and what, in using certain outcomes, or both social cultural and academic and social cognitive, all of that. We have organizations that are currently being sponsored to lead this work, right, Sarah? So there's like, for example, PBL Works, we have the Deeper Learning Initiatives. And so I think if you can, we have been racking our brains about how to navigate that political space, quite frankly, and to figure out how to engage with that problem. So for example, you could say, all right, what are the best practices recommended by PBL Works? Many districts are engaging in that. What are the best practices around performance assessment that come from the Deeper Learning Initiatives? How is that connected to what the best practices are in the literature? And then, and locally, what have people developed locally? You synthesize that, and in that mix, I'm sure a committee of diverse stakeholders can identify a reasonable set of exemplars and guidance materials, right? If that is a task that sort of we say at the state level we want to do, and if that synthesis is sort of like not quite what PBL Works does and not quite what Deeper Learning does, for example, then that we want to put that on the sort of like as a recommendation on the department website is almost like a neutral kind of piece of information. That's one way of doing this. And there's other ways, obviously, of doing that. But I think the question that I have is, when people say like we want examples, how do we work best with the leadership of both the co-ops, the different funded initiatives, and other people who have a strong voice and who have resources and experience in this space, without feeling like you're saying something new out of the ground just because you feel like that's what you have to do,
Yeah, I'd love to invite Carmen Coleman in here from the co-op perspective, and Rachel too. And I know Rob Smith said he was driving, but these are folks who have both lived it out in districts and now have this regional perspective too. I wonder, Carmen, if you wanted to jump in, or Carmen and Rachel or Rob, some combination about this question of like what could be most helpful about technical quality.
Yeah, so I'll start because my perspective's a little bit different from Rachel's. She is newish to this kind of landscape, so I think that's going to be really interesting to hear. My perspective so much comes from sitting as a superintendent and a principal, and working in districts in those kinds of roles. And I think the thing that the elephant in the room that it seems that we sometimes have a hard time acknowledging is that the bottom line is whatever is used to give schools a ranking, a label, a color, a grade, whatever is used to do that is going to drive what happens day to day in the classroom. And even if we aren't serious about really taking seriously the work around profile of a graduate and all that wonderful work that's going on, then it won't matter if in the end, if the accountability formula discounts that in any way, if that is less than whatever it takes to get that label and ultimately, I've been in the room with principals who have ultimately lost their jobs about this. And that's what districts worry about. That's what, people are worried about high stakes accountability. They want all the time, people tell us, we want to do the things that you're saying, but how do we balance that with the accountability system? So we've just got to really think hard about that right now. And this is no secret that, right now we have a commissioner and a board who are very forward thinking and who could not give more inspiration or support to leaders and teachers to do this work. But then you have the other side of the house who is looking for something very different. And that the other side of the house is who comes when you're not doing well in the accountability system. And if we aren't real clear about how these things go together, as much as I want to do what Lou is supporting and Jason Glass is supporting, I am going to do what's going to help me keep my job. And so I just don't think that can be stressed enough. I hope that makes sense. Karen, I get pretty worked up over it because I've lived it for a long time. But that's what people in schools and districts are going to say. So I don't know, Rachel, if you will have a different perspective.
A little bit of a different, not really. Can you all hear a terrible echo, or is it gone now?
It's gone.
It's gone now.
Okay, cool. First of all, every time Carmen talks about this, I feel like I'm being taken to church. I don't know if anybody else felt like they needed to give a hallelujah there, but no, like I've been in schools where that whiplash occurred, right? Like where we were all on board with this innovative forward thinking, this profile of a graduate that we had, and then scores came back and suddenly like it was like whiplash, like all of that creativity and innovation and student centeredness that I felt like we were thriving upon. When the test scores didn't say what they needed to, it was kind of sort of like this back to basics. And so I very much agree with what Carmen was saying there about like, at the end of the day, whatever that accountability system is, like whatever it is that we're measuring in that system, like that's where your focus is going to be. And Andre, I really appreciated hearing like, all of the details that you all are sweating when trying to figure out like what is this framework or this like what is the language we should be speaking as we're navigating this kind of political landscape. At our co-op, we've also been thinking about that, where we have some districts where PBL is a bad word, and some districts where it's their gospel, right? And so then it's like, what is this framework we can use that might give us something to push against? And so I don't know that I have all the answers there, Andre, but I appreciated you all really sweating and thinking through what is going to be kind of the metric that helps us to define this and push against. And what we're finding in our work is that if you analyze those documents like PVL works or HQPA, really at the heart of them, they say very similar things. Yeah. Go ahead. Sorry, that's all the
No,
work.
I was agreeing with you. Sorry, please finish that thought. Yes.
No, that's really it. Is that but I feel for you as you're trying to navigate, like, what is this kind of apolitical document or framework that might help us have leverage points no matter where we're working. And so, yeah, just trying to figure out what that might be and what tools we might have to help us do that. I totally see the space you're working in there.
Yeah, and I would personally say, I agree with everything. I mean, just quickly, I don't think there is anything apolitical, right? At the end of the day, there's always design decisions and some values that are being utilized in order to foreground something or select something or point to something. And the implications of implementing anything will become, to some degree, political, right? I think it's just unavoidable. And, I don't know whether it would be possible, to achieve a state where you say, through just the right kind of framing, like every last person in every district will be on board with all the features of what we're trying to do. So I think the question is more like, how do we get the most people on board? How do we support innovation? And how are we being systematic and clear and transparent, right? About like how we are going about evaluating things, foregrounding things, downplaying others, and sort of mixing this system with the different components. And so I cannot tell you how much I always appreciate when someone, let's say from the co-op, says, we're really wrestling with this. Like we are like pulling our hairs out and sort of saying like, how do we, behind the scenes, all of these different frameworks, they, seem to be saying similar things. We know they're implemented in slightly different ways in different districts, but we wish we could sort of like shoot an arrow through that and come up with some kind of like maybe more generalizable synthetic recommendation or a story that helps people see the similarities and all of this and why we're doing this. Can you guys in the AI committee help us think through that? And what are our options? How do we play with that? Because I think if across the committees, we put our heads together to try to solve whether it's a communication problem, whether it's an implementation scalability problem, whether it's an evaluation problem, whether it's a design problem, I think that is most productive. Like, I feel like we need to have a purpose and a meaning and help each other solve something. So I like, Susan, to your earlier point, to connect that to what you said. I do also think this idea of like accountability system, I thought maybe it wasn't, but the accountability system design piece, right? Of like really making sure that the system isn't devaluing the kind of innovation practices. Like, how do we make sure that happens given particular menus of choices? That's what we in our committee are currently trying to wrap our head around. And there are different ways in which different, for example, states and you in Kentucky have tried this before. Everything comes with pros and cons and trade-offs. So I think it would be nice to sort of like find a way to sit sort of around the same cognitive campfire and have a same common core that we can all look at and say, so let's play with these use cases and exemplars. I mean, it's a little bit me speaking, not necessarily my committee speaking, but I do feel like whenever, I'm saying this more like something to keep in mind, right? Like if you all across your work come across a moment, an artifact, a problem where you think if we could solve this really well, that would be really powerful. And this currently has like, there's an open door for that. There's currency behind it. But we could use some help. Please lift that up and share that across the committees. And let's make that see whether whether people agree and it can be made into this sort of like cool council issue that we all work on sort of like together. And I think that's what and I think Karen Dodd, you were saying that earlier, that's sort of what we're trying to do, right? Find common goals for the cool council that are meaningful, actionable, purposeful, so on and so forth. I'll stop there. Sorry, off my little AI soapbox I go.
Andre, thank you for bringing these questions and the conversation to our group. I dropped in the chat our newest guidance for the Portrait of a Learner, which, as Susan mentioned, includes a group of teachers actually came together that represented grade bands to create a model set of performance outcomes that specifically tie to the competencies in Kentucky's model portrait of a learner. And that's truly what it's meant to be, right? A model to have conversations locally within a community, again, within a diverse group of stakeholders, to have the conversations of what is it that we want for our students, and what are the specific outcomes, and how will we know when they're demonstrating mastery of these competencies, right? These skills, knowledge, and dispositions or mindsets that we hope they leave our system with. And so just encourage you to dive in and kind of explore and play with those. Again, a group of Kentucky teachers came together to create those competencies from districts who had a portrait. So just want to continue to lift that up in conversation as well when we're talking about outcomes. Also just want to leave space. I know this can be a very technical conversation, but knowing that we do have students in the group who are primary users of whatever the system is or becomes, and then family members who are primarily the interpreters of that information, right? Just want to leave space here as well to just get any feedback or considerations or things you want to elevate that the AI committee might consider in their work around this question as well.
Something that my working group is working on, one of our VLE working groups, is the defining each level of Portrait of a Learner and kind of seeing how VLE ties into Portrait of a Learner. So if AI is interested in that, we could definitely cross collaborate with that work too.
Yeah, Justin. So I like that a lot, and can I connect that quickly to what you said, Sarah, very briefly? So, Sarah, I love the way that you lifted up this document, and Justin, that you're saying like we're trying to come up with concrete representations of thinking through, right? Because I think I don't know whether it is just on our committee, but I think people in general like concrete artifacts and containers. So I feel like we could do a lot with taking that document that you have and what you're working on, Justin, as starting points and saying, you know, what we want to do is we want to come up with a really comprehensive, let's call it a resource bank meaning like a resource portal ecosystem, right? And I know you're doing this already, right? But let's say we all agreed that that's what we want to do. And we are willing to sort of engage critically with these documents that are being created to be part of that ecosystem. Like I have a lot of but I have some ideas about how I could take that guide that you have, Sarah, and I haven't seen yours, Justin, but I'm sure if you put that in front of smart people, we'd be like, yeah, okay, so here's what you might, I remember seeing this. Yeah. So I have some thoughts about like how could we make this, flourish and flower, and you have some ideas. So I think if we just frame that in a way that we build out a resource, whatever, space around the portrait of a graduate, and we make that really tight in a sense that we feel like everything we say, everything we produce has some value, comes from both from locally from the ground, but we can stand behind it. I think that would go a long way. And I think that's a really nice, powerful framing. So I would say let's lean into that, yes, even more, and treat that as a cross-committee kind, that with the right framing, right? And then Sarah, you have to be obviously comfortable with that because Justin, because you already feel like you have a mandate to create something, and you have to believe that that goes together. But if we can sort of it's almost like a table of contents, right? A web space design, where you say like, we had these things, then you can work on this, we can work on this, we share it across committees, and we'll build it up together. That might be, I don't know. This it resonates with me. I would certainly personally love to, Justin, if you want to connect in any way with me for starters, and I can bring that also into our committee. Just depends on, what kind of feedback, what kind of input do you want, and what cadence, and we can figure that out. We'd gladly do that. We're very open,
Would love to call attention to Paul's comment in the chat there. I don't want to speak over it, Paul. If you wanted to explain more about that, I think that could also be some real potential for both our group and maybe AI a little bit, but do you want to say more?
Yeah, just simply say that, listening to Andre's very thorough report at a high level of the work going on in accelerating innovation, that they're already addressing this issue of configurability of a state system of systems. And since there is now a fair amount of work going on around the portrait of a learner and defense systems, and to try to create some standards and comparability around them, might that be an excellent place to have a use case examination of how it might fit into a larger system, and maybe start to address some of the technical questions. I'd also want to just say that it feels to me like the issue of the weighting of improvement versus high stakes that Carmen was talking about could be in fact addressed as a system issue in terms of configuration. It always amazes me how when we talk about accountability, we talk about often the high stakes and possible negative consequences, but we don't ever really talk about the other side of it, which is it's about an improvement system, right? How do we improve and get better? And we always overweight it on the high stakes side. And I thought Carmen made an eloquent argument about that.
Yeah, one of our work, the working group I'm on, and is thinks about simple shifts and entry points for folks who just don't know how to get started. This seems to me like a great thing for a district who maybe doesn't have a lot of experience with it, has really been trying to answer to the established system of high stakes test scores, and could use a more complete picture of what a defense system looks like and what are the kinds of outcomes that you see because of it. And to this conversation, how that can be validated. If those criteria explain the outcomes that we want, those things can be validated in the same way portfolios are evaluated in other testing situations that are using validated criteria. College Board and writing tests forever and all those kinds of things. And so I think that it would be helpful for us to create a case review for what this looks like, a case study overview of what this looks like in a district on the ground who's doing it, including lessons learned and how to get started and all of those things.
Karen, that comes back to me to this idea of like, what are the local, like the district or school level theories of action? Let's say they did district level, let's start there, right? Like, so if the district decides to implement a particular pedagogical approach, or including these, let's say, defense-based assessment accountability approaches, and they say like, oh, you know what, we want to have, we are of course interested in, like, does that work? Then yeah, let's figure out what would they consider to be qualitative and quantitative evidence about what it means for this to work. Some of that may be correlational stuff with other outcomes. Others may be more maybe testimonials, right? And descriptions of experiences that people going through the system, including parents, have. And that's okay. And then if you do that across at least some really prominent districts who are really engaged in this and committed to the work, I mean, I think what you'll see is that there's a lot of cross-cutting similarities at a higher level about what people are shooting for, and there's common ways of describing that. and lifting that up also, like if this, if KDE wants to lift that up on more, even on website. I mean, there's the bank, right, that exists currently of like, even though it's sort of like thin at the moment, and it is entry into the bank is only through that competition. But this bank of best exemplars from districts is one of those ways of saying, hey, there's some stuff that really works, and we have some criteria for what we think works. And if you essentially make it into that group, then we can foreground your work in a way. So you can build on that, right? Which is so understanding the whole like theory of action, how people think about validation and what it means to them, and some of that is relevant for at the state level, and some of it is not, and that's okay. It's just like figuring out like what different stakeholders and audiences they need for. Okay.
So this has been really great conversation and a really great entry for us, both a continuation of our existing work and a great entry point into the things that we were planning on doing for the remainder of our meeting here. We are running a little tight on time now, so I want to ask the group how you'd like to proceed. We had two additional things that we really wanted to accomplish tonight. I think we may only have time for one of them. We'll see. Here are two options, and I'd really like to know from the group what you all would find more valuable. One option was to engage in a task where we flesh out the systems bank in a way that AI has already done, as Andre described. So it's a task where we are digging into determining or kind of ideating what are the kind of users that might use this bank, and what are the kinds of things that would be helpful in this bank, and thinking broadly about this systems bank that is going to be created as a result of the CGSA grant deliverable expectations, and what we would also be contributing to. But it's like a design of the bank. That's one discussion. Option two is for us to dig into some existing banks that already live out in the world. So we've talked already in our committee about Canopy, for example. Remember when we had the Canopy project came and they presented, that is a bank. It is a map of where they think awesome things are happening all over the United States. And remember, there was one Kentucky example in there, and we thought we should have more Kentucky examples in there. So that really spurred us into thinking, how can we create our own map? Another bank that exists is a bank that currently is run by KDE on best practices. So we can spend a little time digging into existing banks, or we can talk about designing the systems bank overall. I don't think we're going to have time for both tonight, but we will do one. Our proposal would be to do one tonight, and then and do the next time. So I'm going to put in the chat here some options for you. So I'd love to know from you what your preference is there. Do we want to engage in the task design of the system, or dig into some existing banks? Okay, I see some votes coming in. Easier to dig first and then design second. Okay. Yeah, okay. All right. Thank you all for participating in the democratic process. This is looking like early results are coming in from the polls. The polls will be closing 30 seconds. Okay, it's looking like a lot of consensus around digging into some existing databases, and that informing our thinking about how we might design our own, maybe some features, maybe some use cases, and that. Okay, so let me share screen here for just a second. Actually, let me get to the right tab first. One thing I would like to just quickly walk you through, and then we're going to give you some time to really dig on your own. is I'd really love to show you the KDE best practices database. So we've already had a presentation from Canopy, but we will drop that link in there and give you an opportunity to dig back into Canopy as an example of a database. But I want to spend a little bit of time walking you through a resource that I did not know much about. I'm not sure whether you all do, but this is a database that is run by KDE. This is a best practice database. This database started in 2013. It's got about 160 entries in it. It is run and managed by KDE. Every year they open up and ask for solicitations to this data bank, and folks from all over the state contribute their ideas for artifacts and evidence and ideas that might belong in this database. It really spans from district practices all the way to classroom practices. You'll see a wide range of things in here from all over the state. And you'll see the more recent things here listed 2023 year. Essentially, every March through May, they open up a window for submissions, and then a team of folks goes through and evaluates those submissions using criteria. I believe Cognia are part of the driving criteria for selecting these. And then they choose some folks that are sort of winners. Those winners are invited to, so their submission gets published here in the best practices portal, but also they are invited to present at the continuous improvement summit that happens every year in September. They get a little bit, I think, of monetary reward, and then invitation to the summit, and they can present what their best practice is. That is a way of scaling a best practice. So it is a best practice identified, vetted by a group of people, then scaled out to a larger group of people at the summit. So this is one way to think about not only what a database could look like, but how it actually gets used by folks. So if we just pick one thing here, Rowan County Students Lead, it asks you, when you do that, it asks you to put in your name and your email. So you can do that, and then you can pull up Rowan County submitted this. Here's the contact person if you want to know more about it, Julie Rawlings, who's amazing. Just answer some basic questions. How many students did this? What is the best practice? How do we identify it? What's the situation? And this best practice happens to be about their defensive learning that is aligned to their profile of a learner. So pick this one, may have picked this one as a ringer for us, but this is Rowan County sharing, here's how we have operationalized our defensive learning system aligned with the portrait of a learner. And then when you get on down here to the bottom, there are some actual documents that you can download that would tell you more about their process and how they did it, what their profile looks like, etc. So this is an existing database that lives in KDE right now. You know, one thing to consider, Andre mentioned, one thing to consider is, do we want to build onto an existing database, or do we want to build our own? That is yet to be determined, but at a minimum, we would like to give you a little bit of time to dig into that so you can see more about it. And then also the Canopy project as well. Sarah, can you grab the links for those, please, and drop them in the chat? Any questions on that before we just kind of break up here and do a little bit of individual?
Karen, I don't have a question. I have a comment. It makes me think about Carmen's comments earlier. So traditionally, I've been a part of submitting best practices as a district leader. Traditionally, those have been more around school improvement, very specific actions in school improvement, not always in a deeper learning way. And what is exciting for you, just showing us Julia's that she submitted on there, seeing that if we can start to honor and really put up there some things in deeper learning that cause school improvement. That's the key. It's not either or. It's not it's what if we do deeper learning well, we will see academic improvements, but that's what we're trying to figure out right now. But I think that's interesting for us as we look at this one, to really try to notice some of the more recent practices maybe that have been submitted.
Agreed.
Also,
Agreed.
too, I just want to comment as well. I know when we visited Eminence, he was saying that maybe some of the results of what his students have done may not be evidenced in scores for the school and district necessarily, but are evidenced in the success of the students in their adult life. And so I'm not sure where that data is shown in a district success or a district's accountability, but I think, some students, and we've talked about this in, United We Learn and in Vibrant Learning, some things are not always just a number and are not easily quantified maybe. And so that is also an important thing to note, because students may go on to be farmers and have a successful, family livelihood from that and contribute a lot, both locally, statewide, and federally in that regard. And also some students may go on to have creative work and be innovators and entrepreneurs and things like that. And so I think, and some students may have a later start to college. They may sit out for a couple of years to decide what they want to do. And so how that is measured, because of the deeper learning, and to say every student is not going to learn in the same way and show their learning in the same way, I think maybe presents us with a unique challenge and also a unique responsibility.
Thank you for that, Rhea. I totally agree. I think we're going to be informed both by what we can research and find, but also in our own experiences and our own site visits is another great example of a thing that really I think has informed and should inform our thinking for sure.
Karen.
Yeah, go ahead, Penny.
I'm glad Rhea brought up Eminence because it's been floating around the back of my mind. But we look at this database and we look at best practice. My question is always going to be, who's inputting this in terms of teachers and where it's coming from? Are we talking about a large amount or majority of GT or advanced teachers? Are we talking about situations where we don't really know if these best practices work for kids with disabilities, where these best practices work for EL learners? So my question is an equity question, right?
Yeah.
So I went to Eminence. I saw a lot of fun going on. And he couldn't answer the hard questions for me in terms of those groups and whether or not they were successful. So while success may look different, there are requirements and there are expectations. And when we look at those best practices, are those best practices for, if we use a bell curve, let's talk about a bell curve for a second, and that's who it addresses, and those outliers and those who aren't in the bell truly those best practices don't apply to them. So I'm always going to question how that's taken care of.
Mm-hmm. I asked a similar question about how these things get into the database. And I think their process of opening up submissions for a window of time, and then those things, there's a committee convened. I believe it's Dr. Foster's team at KDE that leads the evaluation of that. I believe they're using Cognia standards, and they're using those things to determine, does this describe the kind of thing that is articulated in the Cognia standards. I don't know how much of it is directly connected to outcomes, to your point about particular groups, and I don't know how much of it is disaggregated by particular groups. I think that is a thing. If we think about building a thing, I think that we should keep our eye on that, because I think there have been a lot of frustrations with standardized testing, but one thing it has done is shined a bright light on places where learning opportunities were not equal for students. And so I think that is a important consideration that we should think about. And I know some folks are thinking about that. I know JCPS is thinking about that with their backpack work disaggregated and some of those other places. So I think that's an important consideration for us to keep in mind. Here's our proposal. I'm seeing the chat go by and I haven't really been keeping a very good eye on it. Here's a proposal for you all. I think our intent was to give you some time to dig into these resources. Sarah dropped the links of Canopy and this database in here so you can dig in a little bit more and start looking at what's really in here and what is their criteria, really, to Penny's point. So I think we're going to propose to give you some time to dig into these resources. So to just kind of adjourn here a few minutes early, because we're not going to have time to complete our task, but we're going to ask everybody in the meantime, both with your time tonight and before our next meeting, to dig into these databases and really do some reflecting on what's in here. What isn't in here? What questions do we have? What are the kinds of things that we would want to consider when we build our own bank or build onto existing bank, and have some folks do some of that work offline here in between this meeting and the next meeting, starting with these last few minutes here. I see a note in the chat that one of the things we wanted to make sure we reminded folks of was our next meeting is September 18th from 5:30 to 7 p.m. This same Zoom, I should have sent you a calendar hold. If you didn't get a calendar hold for those, for the next date, let me know. But if we could ask folks to do this work in between the meetings and come back really having kind of steeped yourself, at least to some extent, in some of these databases, and we can begin thinking not only about the build of the database or the modification of the existing database, but also the kinds of things that would go in it, which is really kind of where we started with our work groups, and I don't want us to lose sight of that. Sarah, Justin, Susan, anyone? What am I forgetting here?
That's about it. The next meeting date, September 18th, 5:30 to 7 Eastern, 4:30 to 6 Central. There's no issues with these new times. We kind of sprung them on with the survey results. Everybody seems to be able to get here.
And Justin, I would just add, in response to some of the feedback, folks requesting more input into the agenda itself, want to leave a moment to either drop a consideration in the chat, or if you email Justin, Susan Sintra as our new vice chair, Karen, and myself, if you think of things in the in-between, if digging into these databases gives you a specific topic of discussion that you'd like to propose for the agenda, please feel free to do so.
All right, if there's nothing else, I think we can go ahead and adjourn this meeting.
Thank you so much for your good and rich and passionate conversation tonight. I think this is really a good foundation for us as we look to our next few tasks together as a group. And thank you, Andre, for coming and spurring this good conversation. And thank you, Vibrant Learning, for engaging.
See y'all next month.